Hi everyone, welcome to the Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Online Lecture. Let's jump right in. Okay, so let's talk about what this lecture will entail. We're going to start off by talking about Aaron Beck and his cognitive therapy. We'll move from this point and talk about Albert Ellis and his Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, or REBT for short. We'll talk about some of the differences that these two approaches have from one another, as well as the similarities that make them a cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, so before we go into CBT theories in depth, I think there's a really critical thing that we name beforehand. The first is that these approaches, while really, really simple, can be really powerful. In addition, that simplicity is often seen as something that we can just jump into, while it really should be named that CBT therapies, while simple and while having a framework, are really difficult to master. A quote that comes up that I really appreciate by Pascal in 1657 is this, in the translation version, is, "I have made this longer than usual because I have not had the time to make it shorter." I love this quote because I think it is really applicable to CBT, that the power in which it has, its simplicity, has really been distilled. So in order for clinicians to utilize that power effectively, they really have to understand and really embody what a CBT therapy is meant to include, not just utilizing the frameworks haphazardly. Okay, so we get to be introduced to Aaron Beck, who was born in 1921 in Providence, Rhode Island. Just like the other theories we've heard of so far, very much the personal can be very applied to the application of developing a theory. Beck is no different. Really had critical life-threatening illnesses, had some really hard and difficult thoughts about fear and anxiety related to suffering, suffocation related to his health complications. This was really critical in his theory development. He was trained as a medical doctor, started off as a neurologist, and then switched over in his residency to psychiatry. Really wanted to validate Freud's work around depression, however became pretty frustrated that empirically he could not do so, did not seem to be able to find any headway in that work. Because of that, when he was studying depression with clients, through his empirical work around depression, he started to develop a theory, really noticing how depressed clients, as he said, was his findings that was anger turned inward, anger from the world, anger from self, turning inward, and how that understanding or viewpoint on depression led an empirical research that then later led to cognitive therapy. Okay, I think it would be sorely remiss if we didn't include Judith Beck into this conversation. Born in 1954 in Philadelphia, she was the second child born to Aaron Beck's family. She has a background, and a very strong one, in education. Before going back to complete her PhD, she had an incredibly strong career working with individuals with learning disabilities. This is critical because she was really important not just for cognitive behavioral therapy, but really for the profession as a whole. She took cognitive behavioral therapy and she really distilled it. She boiled it down into ways that were really accessible for individuals, not just with a PhD, but individuals such as families, parents, teachers, faculty, really trying to expand the accessibility of cognitive therapy. She also moved the profession forward in her outreach with military and service personnel, and really drove the work to empirically validate cognitive therapy as a means to support veterans. Okay, let's discuss a little bit of the key assumptions of cognitive therapy. Some of the key assumptions really start out with this viewpoint that thoughts are accessible by the client, that we, any of us, can access our thoughts that might be adaptive, such as, I am okay as I am, to thoughts that are maladaptive, as, no matter what feedback we're getting, I'm the best, even if we're getting all F's in class, to, I'm stupid and unlovable. This ability to access these thoughts is also held that thoughts are malleable, that we can, just as if you think about a ring, that the metal in which might be firm, it might be hard, and can be readapted, can be malleable and shaped into a new thought process. Another assumption is that these thoughts hold really personal meanings. A really important multicultural consideration too that can be really powerful is that not all thoughts that we might dispute for one person might we dispute from another person of a different orientation or a different background. Another and final major assumption in this theory is that this change and assessment can occur by the client, that the therapist can be a necessary facilitator and isn't absolutely required. There's a lot of educational theory associated with cognitive theory, in that if we have a strong enough framework and a procedure in which we can work by, that clients can do their own work. Clients and people in general, once adequately trained, can have that thought, can stop, and can, through a malleable process, can reshape their thought processes in order to get better outcomes. So they would believe that a strongly developed cognitive therapy workbook, a self-help book, could be really helpful. In cognitive therapy, we have two primary areas of meaning making, as well as determining where the intervention and how the intervention will be made. They stem from two ideas. And I want to just name right now that while these two might seem really simple, I would encourage at the end of this slide to pause this video and go back and really dive back into the chapter, reading up on cognitive interpretations and distortions. There are a ton of different examples in which this video won't be able to cover of key distortions that we can keep an eye out for, as well as how these interpretations might differ based on multicultural perspectives. So moving on from there, cognitive interpretations is when an event happens, when we perceive something for happening, we have a thought about the world, a thought about ourselves, and the dynamic in which that happens. I'll give an example. So earlier today, I went to one of the grocery stores in town. As I went there, the cashier was really cold and very distant, would not make eye contact, and was very, very quick, speech was kind of jabbed. Okay, what do you want? Sure, cash, card. Part of what I noticed was that my interpretation, the immediate response I had was, ooh, what have I done wrong? I must have offended this person, was the next thought that I am really aware of having. Now, this could be a cognitive distortion. To my knowledge, I didn't do anything to upset this person. To my knowledge, I've had no other interaction with this person. So the immediate thought process, my interpretation that I've done something wrong, could be true and could be a distortion. Going back and looking at the proof, it looks like it's more of a distortion. Having no recollection and no evidence to the contrary that I did anything wrong, it looks like that a negative self-talk was really at play here and really influenced my behavior. That the next thing I did was I got cold and I got kind of jabby and just like short. Okay, well, have a nice day. Left. Again, I would really encourage you right now to slow this process down and take a look back at your book, really understanding some of the key distortions we can hold: overgeneralization, binary thinking, are just a few that might be really helpful to understand this in better depth. Okay, let's switch gears slightly and talk about Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive behavioral therapy. Was born in Pittsburgh in 1913, however lived the majority of his life in New York. Started his career by performing psychoanalysis. Was really drawn to Freud's work. However, became disenchanted and pretty frustrated in the fact that clients either were waiting a long time for change to happen or were becoming frustrated and leaving the process before ever seeing any kind of change. From this, he did notice that the clients who did experience change, that a unique pattern happened. That when the thought changed, that the behaviors, emotions, and then thoughts that precipitated that also seemed to change. So his theory development really started from a clinical practice, which differs from the empirical practice of cognitive therapy. Pretty unique too that both of these therapies were developed at a pretty dang similar time without having any knowledge of each other. Another interesting way in which someone's life can really impact the therapy and theory that they develop, and one of my favorite examples is the Bronx Botanical Garden self-experiment. Being really nervous at 19, especially around women, Albert decided to try an experiment. He named that he was going to talk to 100 women while in the gardens, really noticing how his thoughts impacted his behaviors and actions. And by trying to change subtly and through practice, changing the thoughts, how that really had an impact on his later behavior. Okay, let's talk about some key assumptions about rational emotive behavioral therapy. The first is that Ellis really wanted this to be viewed as a holistic therapy, that thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are all interconnected. From this, there's this cause and effect cycle, is that our beliefs really impact these other systems for us in both maladaptive and adaptive ways. That our belief about ourself can be a guiding force that changes the others. However, they are still interconnected. Holds that emotions and behaviors are created from our beliefs, again, just signifying the importance as that first domino to fall is where change can be made. Really held that this can be and needs to be an educational process to help dispute these thoughts with clients. Oftentimes, REBT can have a conflict that a counselor's role is to dispute these irrational beliefs. But this can also be done through self-help text and worksheets. The final really key assumption is this viewpoint on irrational thoughts. That these irrational thoughts have three basic musts, kind of this purgatory of should, could, have to. The first is that I must do well in order for others to love me. The next is this other people must treat me fairly, kindly, and well. The next is that the world and my living conditions must be comfortable, that they must be ingratiating to what I want. Again, hearing the importance on that really powerful word for REBT, must, have to. So REBT has a really quick and snazzy framework in which you can use. The ABC model. Super easy to remember, right? Let's dive in a little more to it. A is seen as the activating event. So the example I'd like to give here is really similar to the one that Ellis had for himself. That he asked out, let's say, a girl named Jackie. I'm not sure who he first asked out, and we'll say it's Jackie. That he asked Jackie out on a date and she said no. That's the activating event. Now we move forward to the belief. That belief is either rational or irrational, without judgment, rather how adaptive or maladaptive is that viewpoint. Now, let's say Ellis's first thought was, I am never going to find love. Now, that might be an irrational belief. Is he certainly going to date Jackie? It doesn't look like it. And that initial reaction was, I'm never going to find love. This kind of purgatory of should, could, must, have to is where we can identify an irrational belief. So, activating event, he asks Jackie out. He moves into belief, a very quick response of, I'm never going to find love. Maybe I'm unworthy of love. Now, the consequences can be emotional, cognitive, or behavioral. Let's start with the emotional consequence. So now he's never going to find love. He feels hopeless and depressed. And now he doesn't want to do anything. So his behavior is shifted into never approaching Jackie again or never approaching any other woman he might be interested in. That next thought process might be reinforced by this held belief, that this rigidity in this belief might actually be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The lovely thing about RAVT is the next stages of disputing the irrational belief. So disputing does not mean we have to look at it as a positive nature. So disputing is saying, gosh, I bet Jackie really wants to date you. That wouldn't be accurate disputing. Jackie made her viewpoints pretty dang clear. However, saying it's okay, there are other fish in the sea, and you're okay as you are, is a totally rational disputing belief. That it doesn't mean or make to pull someone from a hard feeling. Rather, it says, hey, it makes sense you feel that way, and maybe not all of that is true. E is when we float back to our original belief. And this is where we can insert an effective belief. An effective belief might be, I'm okay as I am. Now, let's go back through this whole thing. He asks Jackie out, or he asks another woman out in the gardens. He asks Claire out, and she also says no. He holds a belief of, okay, ow, and I'm okay as I am. His consequences might be vastly different. He might feel sad and kind of frustrated and move forward. His thoughts or behaviors might be, hey, gosh, I wonder, did I do anything wrong? And Claire might just respond, oh, I already have a boyfriend. Oh, okay. He has more than to support that disputed belief. This new belief that I'm okay as I am allows him to try to engage in other romantic options. Want to float back just for a brief moment, going over the ABC model. Really, really powerful, and has to be co-authored, not just by the counselor, but also by the client. Okay, as we come to the end of our lecture, let's make sure to talk about some similarities as well as the differences between these two theories that are all within a cognitive behavioral therapy. So the first really main similarity is that thoughts are really critical, that they are the first thing that often then is a domino effect on our other experiences, such as physiological response, emotional response, behavioral response. That beliefs have consequences on these further actions. That disputing these thoughts, while they do it in different ways, that challenging these beliefs, these thinking errors, is really critical. That both of these really hold that as humans we're perceptible to having errors in our thinking logic. Finally, that homework is used in order to reinforce, to challenge new belief systems, to encourage different behavior that might impact a new thought or a new belief of self. That cognitive behavioral therapist is going to be able to adapt either the cognition first, and usually primarily, if not maybe behavior, to then reinforce a new thinking pattern. Okay, let's wrap up when it comes to some of the differences. So all being cognitive behavioral therapies, there are some pretty key differences between these two. Rational emotive behavioral therapy is incredibly directive and challenging. That the role of the counselor is to be an expert in identifying and later disputing irrational beliefs. That irrational beliefs are, like the examples I shared before, there are core rational beliefs that are viewed to be universal, and that it is the responsibility of the counselor to challenge these pretty forcefully at times. Now, also this viewpoint of this challenge can really come from this teaching role, that let me help you understand that we as humans do this, that here's the framework. By knowing this framework, we can help you challenge these beliefs, which will have great impact on your health. I want to stress too that this challenging can definitely look different for each clinician. Some of it being incredibly abrasive, to some of it being challenges that you would see from maybe other clinicians. That the way in which it can be performed is pretty different between different rational emotive behavioral therapists. However, this teacher role, this viewpoint of a guide, is pretty solidly there. Cognitive therapy, rather than direct disputes, uses a Socratic method of open-ended questions that really help to identify that maybe and assess that maybe these thoughts aren't so useful, maybe they're not right. From here, this continuation of a Socratic method to come alongside a client to help look for different ways of thinking, that supporting this process as an expert rather than a teacher. Finally, disputing rules, that really had a strong viewpoint that in cognitive therapy that we obeyed by rules, some of them that make sense, and some have made sense for years, and others that start to lose their rationale. That in helping clients identify these rules, that we can have them create new rules that might be better suited to getting to their goals. Okay, so for the last time, really want to float back that the simplicity of these models, really we have to understand how they were distilled in order to really make them effective. Things that I really appreciate in the text here on page 303. At the very end, it talks in the summary about the importance of the working relationship, that these core factors that you'll see in other therapies are also really important. Your relationship with your client, the process that's happening within therapy are not ignored in CBT, be it cognitive therapy or REBT. If you have the time and you can make the time, I would really encourage to look over this area again and see how this might be similar to the other therapies we've learned and are learning. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. See you all in class.